48 Hours continues.
I think that everyone who knew Sebastian thought that he was going on to do something interesting with his life. Yeah, people expected him to be a leader, to do something interesting, and I hope one day he will.
Sebastian Burns and Atif Rafay should have been celebrating at the West Vancouver High School 10-year reunion. Instead, they had become the class of '93's most infamous graduates. Prosecutors say just 1 year out of high school, these brilliant best friends tried to commit the perfect murder. It was a brutal crime.
There's blood all over his face.
That shocked the upscale suburb of Bellevue, Washington. Atif's mother, father, and sister bludgeoned to death. The motive, insurance money. The boys got away and were living in Canada until undercover police officers caught them on tape boasting about how they did it.
How did you do 3 people at once? Not at once.
Now, on the eve of their murder trial, a judge would decide if a jury would get to hear those chilling confessions.
I do not find the undercover officers' conduct in this case shocking or outrageous, although they were deceitful, persistent, and aggressive. They engaged in tricks, but not dirty tricks.
It was a controversial ruling allowing the boys' own words to be used against them.
Who'd you do first? The father.
And would set the tone for the whole trial.
Just how powerful is the impact of this video of these 2 boys confessing to murders?
It's incredibly powerful. When I first saw it, I was taken aback. I was shocked. There are 2 young men seemingly laughing about slaughtering 3 people and saying, I did it.
And while the confessions may be shocking, the defense says they're not true.
This case is about what happens when a presumption of guilt, when a gut feeling that you have the right suspects takes over from logical and objective evaluation of the evidence. This case is about what happens when you pursue individuals as opposed to pursuing the truth.
Finally, in November 2003, more than 9 years after the Rafay family murders, Sebastian and Atif get their day in court.
The jury's going to finally hear the story of what really happened to the Rafay family, and they'll hear the story of Sebastian and Atif's innocence.
But prosecutors had a very different story to tell.
Sebastian Burns is young, thoughtful, charismatic, manipulative, and most importantly, a killer. A brutal killer.
You've been portrayed as a monster.
Yeah. Yes.
Maniacal, plotting, a murderer. Are you those things?
No.
The state's theory is we want to make the jurors hate these 2 young men. Essentially, they make it a test of character as opposed to a test of evidence.
And character is at the heart of the prosecution's case.
All rise. Superior Court is now in session.
The defendants were 2 young men who believed they could commit the perfect murder.
Roger David Heiser opened for the state.
Ladies and gentlemen, what you will hear in the end is that it was this very hubris that sealed their fate, and their arrogant and unrealistic belief that they were smart enough to achieve mastery over the police and their investigation.
He zeroed in on the piece of evidence that launched the case, and for the first time revealed a startling flaw in the boys' plan.
I need an ambulance.
They made that 911 call too quickly.
We think they're dead.
My belief is that they just walked straight into the house and made the 911 call.
The timing was critical. So we asked Detective Thompson to retrace their drive home from downtown Seattle, where they were last seen that night.
18 minutes.
What does that tell you?
And 18 minutes would give them 3 minutes in the house.
And 3 minutes, said the prosecutors, was not enough time in the house to find the bodies and do all the things Sebastian and Atif told the police they did.
And think about what they had to do in that 3 minutes. 3 minutes to arrive home, pull the family car into the garage, enter the home through the garage, discover and comprehend that Sultana, Tariq, and Basma had been brutally attacked and lay dead in 3 different areas of that house.
The revelation startled the defense, but Sung Richardson was thinking on her feet.
I'm asking you, how long does it take to walk into a house and see these 2 brutally butchered bodies of Atif's family and then run downstairs and call 911?
And turn the prosecution's argument on its head.
How long is 3 minutes? Well, let's see. That was about a minute and a half.
But remember, it wasn't just the murders. In that 3 minutes, the boys also had to figure out there'd been a burglary and that a VCR and Discman were missing.
There's been some kind of break-in.
I hear the voice of a person who has contrived a story that can only be explained by somebody who knew very well what had happened in the Rafay family home.
I was out of my mind at the time. I was totally in shock, totally staggered and confounded and was almost totally hysterical.
In a case where every minute matters, the defense bolsters their claim of the boys' innocence by playing up statements the neighbors on both sides of the Rafay house gave to police in the days following the murders. The neighbors initially said that they heard pounding coming from inside the Rafay house at a time when the boys have an airtight alibi.
You were standing in this driveway and
Mark Seidel lived right next door to the Rafays.
How loud were the bangs you were hearing?
They're pretty hard hits. A little bit harder than you'd hang a picture.
Seidel says back then he didn't think a murder was taking place next door and figured the Rafays, who had just moved in, were probably unpacking.
I sort of thought about going over and helping them so they could go to sleep, but luckily that night I didn't.
The Rafay's other next-door neighbor, Judy Rybak, testified that she also heard sounds.
Initially, I thought it just sounded like hammering. It had sort of an odd resonance to it.
The neighbors who heard these sounds described them in great detail and verified what they were for the police, all heard them well before 10 o'clock at night.
And at 10 o'clock, Sebastian and Atif were still seen at the movie theater.
If the jury believes these initial reports that Mark Seidel and Judy Rybak gave to police, your case could be in trouble.
Absolutely. You can't be in 2 places at one time. There's no debating that point.
There are 2 independent neighbors who separately heard the murder happen at the end of twilight, before 10 o'clock. And we were known to be on the other side of town when that happened. It was impossible for us to have committed this crime.
Prosecutors contend it is possible. Even though the boys were seen going to the 9:50 movie, there's no proof that they stayed.
Is there a way for these 2 boys to exit the theater without drawing attention to themselves, say during the movie?
Jose Martinez sold the boys movie tickets that night, and he showed us how they could sneak out from this theater.
Got this exit behind the curtain or the other one over there.
If they slip through this curtain, you're not letting any light into the theater.
Correct.
And up these stairs?
And out this exit door.
2 doors outside.
The defense protested that even though it could have happened that way, there was no proof that it did. and that prosecutors were grasping at straws to get a conviction.
They sifted through Sebastian's history and his life, and Atif's history and his life, and tried to find anything that would make them look like bad people.
In fact, months into the trial, prosecutors brought this intriguing surprise witness from the boy's past, who said she had evidence that could turn the case. But first, they would have to convince the judge to let the jury hear what she had to say.
You swear or affirm.
Nazgul Shifte was a friend from the boy's high school days who had dated Sebastian.
What was this comment that Sebastian Burns made that stood out at you?
He said, I want to try to kill someone one day to see how it would feel, because I think I would find it enjoyable.
She claimed a late-night conversation she'd had years ago with the boys in her bedroom had planted the seeds for murder.
Did you think he was serious?
He wasn't laughing, and he said it in a serious tone.
Sebastian doesn't deny having the conversation, but emphatically says he wasn't serious.
It's a one-line paraphrase of a sarcasm from a hippy-dippy 3 a.m. conversation 10 years ago, and I can't remember enough about it to defend myself against it.
If anyone would reflect on that and think, imagine if the worst parts of my personality, maybe the worst moments when I was 18 years old, that I would be reminded of them for the next 9 years of my life, and that in the public's eye would be the person that I'd become, I think people would really shudder. It's a nightmare.
Thank you for your time and your testimony.
It was certainly damning testimony, but the jury would never hear it.
There is no question, had I known about this last spring, I would have admitted this. 4 months into this thing, I can't stop this process and let everyone dash to the four winds to try and research this.
The judge's decision flustered prosecutors. But there's another witness, more powerful and much more damning.
You swear or affirm that the testimony about
the friend the boys swore would never betray them.
Do you recognize Mr. Burns and Mr. Rafay in the courtroom here today?
Yes, I do.
It had been years since Jimmy Moshi had seen his high school buddies, Sebastian and Atif. Jimmy had moved to Japan and was living under another name when prosecutors forced him to return to Seattle and face his friends at their murder trial.
He was, in no uncertain terms, conflicted. In fact, he spent the last 2 or 3 years of his life trying to avoid the eventuality of being compelled to come to court and testify against his two best friends.
Jimmy could have easily been sitting next to his best friends, charged with a crime. Back in 1995, during the undercover operation, Jimmy was also a target of the RCMP. The RCMP believed Moshi helped the boys plan the murder of the Rafay family, and they wanted him to give a full confession on tape, just like his friends had done.
You know what went on down there in that house? Went on? Yeah.
But no matter how much he was pressed for details, Moshi refused to implicate his friends in the murder.
Okay, do you know who killed the parents? Yeah. Who? Is that what you want? I just want you to explain to me exactly the purposes of you wanting to know. Is that so we can establish this kind of totally for trust? Totally for trust? Totally.
In some ways, was Jimmy Moshi the smartest of them all?
He's not in jail.
In fact, Jimmy was arrested with Sebastian and Atif and interrogated by authorities in Canada.
He was told that he might face the death penalty himself. He was told that his family, his job, his future would be ruined unless he said that Sebastian and Atif confessed to him.
Back then, Jimmy told the police that his friends were innocent.
At the time of your arrest on July 31, 1995, were they honest answers?
They were answers that, I guess, the intention of a lot of those answers was to protect Sebastian and Atif.
At that point, on July 31, 1995, why is it that you gave answers that were designed to protect Sebastian and Atif?
And I guess it was also in a way to protect myself, but in general, because I didn't want Sebastian and Atif to get arrested and potentially convicted.
But under increasing pressure, Moshi eventually agreed to cooperate. And in exchange, he was granted immunity from charges of conspiracy to commit murder. Suddenly, he began to reveal more to the police about what he knew. But now the question loomed. Would Moshi betray his best friends?
Had this subject ever come up before, the notion of Atif Rafay killing his family?
No, this was the first time.
In a halting voice that often dropped to a whisper, Jimmy told the court that it was during a drive from Seattle to Vancouver when Atif first brought up the idea of killing his family.
What was your response to the notion of Atif's notion of killing his family?
I guess I was listening, and I mean, he was my friend at the time, and I guess in a way I was neutral on that notion.
On the stand, Jimmy recounted a discussion about how the boys would commit the crime.
Remember which methods were discussed?
I remember something about gassing the house, and I remember a discussion about, I guess, using a baseball bat.
What do you remember about why a baseball bat could or should be used?
I guess a quick and a painless way of killing someone.
I don't think there's any question that he was a sounding board for them.
The prosecution says Jimmy consulted on an especially chilling part of the plan. Sebastian and Atif stayed here at the Rafay family home during the 5 days before the murders. And it was no coincidence. It was part of the plan, prosecutors say, to commit the perfect crime.
If they had been living in the house previously, that any kind of hair or whatever samples that were collected after wouldn't necessarily mean that they had done it.
By virtue of their being in the house for several days, any fingerprint that would be found or could be found could be explained as a result of their having been there for several days. Any hair evidence that might be found could be explained for them having been in the house for several days prior to the murders.
It's diabolical, but it's pretty clever.
Damn clever.
Finally, Jimmy gave the prosecution what they needed. He said that Atif watched while Sebastian bludgeoned the family.
I remember hearing about how, I guess, Atif was pretty distraught, and that from the moment that Sebastian had struck his mother, that it was kind of there's no going back. And
how hard was it to sit and listen to Jimmy Moshi's testimony?
It was enormously difficult. I think it was difficult for him as well. As I say, I am outraged that he did it, but at the same time, I think I reserve my real outrage for the people who forced him to do it.
Did you discuss a plan to murder the Rafay family with Jimmy Moshi?
No, we didn't. Never.
Why did Jimmy Moshi testify that you did?
Because he had a life sentence held to his head. And if he didn't say what the police and the prosecution wanted him to say, that life sentence was going to go off.
It's the first time in 8 years that you have ever said anything like that, isn't it, sir?
I'm not sure.
And isn't what happened
The defense tried to hammer back. Jimmy once lied to save his friends, so he could be easily lying now to save himself.
You're making it up as you go along, sir. That's why you're saying things for the first time yesterday.
No, I don't believe I am.
Do you believe that Jimmy Moshi is a liar?
Jimmy Moshi is a self-admitted liar. Jimmy Moshi acknowledges that he has lied. The question will be, how many lies does Jimmy Moshi get to tell? Mr. Moshi, this conversation was on
The defense
September
needed to come
26,
back with something strong, and they had an arsenal of forensic evidence that flew in the face of Miyoshi's testimony. They told the jury that there were 3 killers in the house that night. Experts analyzed the patterns of blood on the wall and found drops everywhere except this area, where there was no blood, indicating another killer may have stood there during the attack. They also said a pillow was moved during the bludgeoning.
So we have killer number 1 moving the pillow. We have killer number 2 bludgeoning Dr. Rafay with the bat. And then we have killer number 3 who has to remain in the exact same place throughout the entire duration of the attack on Dr. Rafay.
And there was even more tangible evidence. A single hair on Tariq Rafay's bed.
According to the police officers there, this was an important hair because this hair, according to the Bellevue Police Department, would tell them who committed this crime.
Did it match Atif?
No.
Sebastian?
No.
Sultana?
No.
Basma?
No.
Tariq?
No.
We don't know whether that hair originated from someone who sat in the same seat that Sebastian Burns sat in at the movie theater, or whether it was picked up by Dr. Rafay at his workplace, or how it got on that bed.
Or if it was a hair from the killer.
Or if it was a hair from the killer.
Prosecutors also added DNA evidence needs to fit a pattern and appear in more than one place at a crime scene.
That DNA profile appeared nowhere else in that house. There was absolutely no other pattern of trace evidence that could even be remotely suggested to be related to that hair. That was an isolated hair.
So, with the forensic evidence inconclusive, the case comes down to whom the jury would believe.
You're saying the testimony of one of my best friends, don't listen to that. My own words on the videotape, don't listen to that. Just take my word for it. We didn't do it.
Defense calls Sebastian Burns.
All rise for the jury.
More than 100 witnesses would take the stand in the State versus Burns and Rafay.
Could you kill again? Circumstances are right.
Finally, Canada's most secret undercover operation would be exposed before the jury. And so would the question that had lingered for so many years.
Why would you confess to a murder you didn't do?
At that point, it seemed like the only safe choice. It seemed like the best choice.
Why on earth would anyone confess to a murder they didn't do unless they were petrified that they were actually going to be killed themselves or people they loved were going to come to some type of harm?
The defense set out to prove that the scales were tipped from the beginning. Professional liars.
In 1975, I was first trained in undercover work.
Against teenage boys.
Have you worked as the primary undercover operator before?
Yes.
I am frightened by the fact that this kind of undercover operation can be used ostensibly to search for the truth when it is built in whole on lies and manipulation and threats.
Mr. Burns, come on forward.
Sebastian would have to convince the jury to believe him now and not to believe what he said on those tapes.
I was in way over my head, and I did not want to be involved with these guys. I was upset with myself for having agreed to drive the car.
Sebastian began his side of the story with the first assignment from the crime boss, transporting that stolen car.
What was your reaction when you heard that they wanted you to drive this stolen car?
Well, pretty quickly, I felt that I'd been tricked.
Sebastian, why didn't you just look at him and say, I am out of here. Walk away.
No, but there is no walking away.
You want to know what I did my time for? I told to the guy. When it came time for court, the person that could finger me, they're not around anymore.
Sebastian says he couldn't walk away from criminals whose power seemed to be so far-reaching.
I believe that if I'd cross them, or if they weren't happy with me, or if they thought that I was going to betray them, that they would have me killed.
I just assumed that, you, with your connections, that if I were to you around, okay, I would just assume that I would wake up one day with a bullet in my head.
On the stand, Song Richardson pressed Sergeant Hazlitt about his scare tactics.
Sebastian could easily, very easily, have believed that you and your organization would hurt people if they crossed you, right?
He could have believed it, yes.
And that you would kill people if they ever crossed you, right?
Well, I've never said that. It goes to Sebastian Burns' imagination. Let him sit back when he goes home at night and imagine whatever he chooses to.
Is there any time in which your character directly threatens Sebastian Burns?
No, never.
The idea was not to frighten Sebastian, but to make him comfortable talking about murder to other murderers.
I know you did that, Bruce. That's why you're here, because you're solid.
Could Sebastian Burns have walked away from his relationship with you at any time he chose to do so?
Without a doubt, he didn't have to return our calls.
Hey, it's Sebastian leaving message number 3.
Sebastian stayed, the defense argued, because he believed the Bellevue police were fabricating evidence against him.
I'm going to show you something. You never saw this from me.
That phony memo detailing the evidence that the cops had against the boys.
Just read this piece of
The undercover operators only offered to destroy the evidence if Sebastian confessed.
You don't say to Sebastian, look, Sebastian, if you didn't do it, just say so. We'll still deal with that evidence for you. We'll deal with it so you won't get convicted. But if you didn't do it, just say so. We'll still help. You never said that, right?
No, I didn't say that because, up until this time, Sebastian Burns had never denied the involvement in the murders to me.
Going into the meeting on July 18th, what was your plan?
My plan was to claim to be the murderer that they insisted that they believed that I was.
And to be convincing, Sebastian says he studied newspaper accounts, so he'd know details of the murders.
What'd you do first?
The mother.
Then?
And dad and sister.
As the cameras rolled, Sebastian confirmed the police theory that the weapon was a baseball bat.
Did you use a metal or a wooden bat?
And the eerie notion that the killer had showered before leaving.
Take the shower to clean off, blood and that kind of stuff.
And that wasn't the only reason why detectives found no blood on the boys.
How do you it's on a baseball bat? Have to shower, no blood on you.
Do it naked.
Sebastian pointed out how he and Atif would profit from the crime.
Whatever money we get, it's like we would invest it in our film, I guess.
And he gave up the most sought-after clue, the loophole in the alibi.
What'd you do the dirty deed?
During the movie.
And I'm gonna get you out of the trouble you're in.
Flattered.
Huh?
I'm flattered by your attention.
Atif explained that while Sebastian killed his family, he staged a break-in.
What did you do when you were in the house?
Stood around. Ranked out the VCR.
You told Hazlitt, am I correct, that you committed these murders of the Rafays, the Rafay family, during the movie. Am I right?
Correct.
That the VCR was taken to also contribute to the simulation of a breaking and entering?
That's right.
You had the alibi of the movie.
The prosecution had another bombshell ready to drop on the defense. It wasn't the first time Sebastian used a movie as an alibi.
You got into a car collision, didn't you?
Yes.
You were driving your family car at the time?
That's correct, yes.
I mean, you hit a pole in a parking lot. Did you own up to it at the time?
No, I did not.
When he was 16, Sebastian staged an elaborate cover-up to conceal the fact that he had wrecked the family car.
Mr. Burns, the reality is what you said about doing was very similar to what you told Hazlitt you did in this case. Isn't that correct?
I told Hazlitt that we committed a murder, which we didn't do.
Well, Mr. Burns, let me stop you there for a moment.
Roger David Heiser drew a haunting parallel between the accident scene and the murder scene. Back in high school, Sebastian went to great lengths to make it seem like someone else did the damage while he was at the movie. But the insurance company caught him in the cover-up.
And in March of 1992, albeit with this stupid little car crash, what you decided to do was to pick up the pieces of evidence that were at the scene of this collision. Am I right?
Correct.
You put those back in your car, am I correct?
Correct.
You took them to an entirely different location in North Vancouver, am I right?
Correct.
And you staged a scene in a parking lot, am I right?
Basically.
You manipulated the evidence to appear as though it was something that it wasn't. Am I right?
Yes.
And the reason you did that, sir, was so that you could say that this accident occurred while you were at the movies. Am I right?
Correct.
Sir, you weren't at the movies when that accident occurred, were you?
No. The difference is that the first one is a car accident and the second one is a homicide.
That's correct, Mr. Burns. That is a difference.
And the difference is also that in the first case, I was responsible for the car accident, and in the second case, I had nothing to do with this homicide.
David Heiser wasn't about to let that statement go in front of the jury. He had more of that damning tape.
Can I tell you something? Like, I felt like, I was capable. And, like, you've ever killed a person?
And on July 18th of 1995, after you told him that you had in fact killed the Rafay family, you told him that you did it because you felt capable of killing, right?
Correct, yes.
Did you see it happen?
Yeah.
All three?
No, only one.
Which one?
My mom.
The demeanor with which they deliver this message of what they accomplished that night in Bellevue is chilling.
Did any of them fight?
Yeah.
Well, that's a story that hasn't really been told, because
I've been doing something.
I know that.
You can hear Atif giggling in the background and kind of going, oh God, oh God.
Basically, his father, it was nothing, and curious episode was the sister who basically, was standing up and walking around or whatever. And so took a little effort.
Your behavior on that tape, when there's some laughing, did you think that the murder of the Rafay family was some sort of a comedy?
No, absolutely not. But we were lying, and I was not thinking about the murder of the Rafay family when I was talking.
To a certain extent, I had essentially put the real events out of my mind entirely, so that I was really only thinking of the story that I was selling to Mr. Hazlitt.
That's not part of a story that two scared individuals come up with because they think it's what two mafia characters want to hear. That's the truth. That's the truth coming from the mind of Atif Rafay and Sebastian Burns.
It's a challenge to sum it all up in a couple of hours.
6 months of testimony comes down to one final argument.
There is no gray area. There is nothing in between. Either you must believe what Sebastian Burns says and every single thing he says, or you must convict him.
James Conant will speak for the state.
You like your odds?
Very much.
Are you ready?
Absolutely.
Jeff Robinson knows this is his last chance in front of the jury, and he will have to counter with everything he has.
How many times does the evidence have to tell us it's not Sebastian and it's not Atif before we listen? Please listen.
He points to the bloody scene in Tariq's bedroom and evidence of 3 killers.
3 people went into Dr. Rafay's room, and there are 3 unknown DNA profiles.
Robinson reminds them that there is no forensic evidence linking the boys to the crime.
And the question that you're required to ask yourselves is, what has the state shown me to make me believe that he is guilty without having one reason to doubt it?
Mr. Conant, the floor is yours.
Your Honor, thank you. There can be no doubt in your mind that these 2 are the killers.
The prosecution insists it is Sebastian's own words that leave no room for doubt.
How did you kill 3 people at once? Not at once, I don't want to do that.
And ultimately, the words that came out of Sebastian Burns' mouth led to his demise. His hubris led to his demise.
What would be most compelling to the 12 jurors? Would it be the neighbors who thought they heard the murders that night when the boys were spotted at the movie theater? Or would they be haunted by Jimmy Miyoshi's words damning his 2 former best friends? Would the jury believe that Sebastian was scared of those undercover operators? Or is this the picture of a young man who thinks he's about to get away with murder? For the last time, the jury is asked to envision the last moments in the Rafay family home.
This is the horror that they left behind, ladies and gentlemen. This is what we must not lose sight of.
Finally, it is up to the jury to make its decision.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, if you're retired to deliberate your verdicts.
In the script for The Great Despisers, 2 boys are wrongfully convicted and executed. After 4 days of deliberations, 10 years after the murders, the final act in the real-life plotline.
All rise for the jury.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Glenn Sebastian Burns, guilty of the crime of murder in the 1st degree as charged in count 1, verdict form 1F. We, the jury, find the defendant, Atif Ahmed Rafay, guilty of the crime of murder in the 1st degree as charged in count 3.
I did not believe that they didn't have reasonable doubt. I just didn't believe it.
I'm afraid of him. I think he's very scary. I looked at him a few times and he was glaring at me personally, and anybody that commit a crime like that is a frightening person.
I was looking at individual jurors just to see if they, I don't know, I guess I was looking for some kind of an answer.
I wonder how they sleep at night. I wonder how they came to that decision.
Back up.
With the verdict that was given, can you sleep well at night now?
Yes.
No second thoughts?
No.
No way.
Not with anyone?
Not a doubt.
Nope.
I personally myself, to the very day of the end of the trial, wanted them to be innocent. And in the end, I was totally overcome by the evidence, obviously. But I think all of us were wishing that some suspect would be guilty so that we could not convict these 2 young men.
On October 22nd, 2004, 5 months after the verdict,
Good morning. Morning, Pete.
Sebastian and Atif were back in court.
Sebastian, anything to say before they put you away?
This time to hear their sentence from the judge.
Send Mr. Burns a very clear message that he has been found guilty. Send him to prison for the rest of his natural life, ×3, 3 consecutive life sentences.
Mr. Burns?
Thank you, Your Honor.
Sebastian had his own message for the court.
With all due respect to the jurors, the verdict was wrong.
In the audience were jurors who had convicted him and the undercover operators who had sealed his fate.
I certainly feel sorry for the victims. I feel sorry for their surviving son.
This was his only expression of sympathy
Before I continue, I would just encourage you to consider.
in a speech that went on
And that's
for
what
almost 2
our
hours.
jury was made to have.
I want to insist today on the truth that we are innocent.
Atif never took the stand during the trial.
And I love my parents. I revere their memory to this day.
He used this moment to admit he was ashamed.
Your Honor, the impersonation that I gave on those videotapes,
Yes.
there's no relation, is alien to everything that I've ever felt or thought. I truly admired my father. I was probably closer to my mother than to any other person that I ever will be. And the memory of her wit and her charm and her keen human sympathy, they're dear to me to this day.
Mr. Rafay, thank you. Unlike your colleague, I find you genuinely remorseful, Mr. Rafay. I think the tragedy for you and ultimately your family was a meeting, a fateful meeting at probably a school cafeteria or a school ground, I don't know where it occurred, with Mr. Burns.
Judge Mertel saved his harshest words for Sebastian Burns.
Mr. Burns, you're not immoral. You're amoral. You are an arrogant, convicted killer. You are not a kid, as you so often refer to yourself. You're an adult, and you will be held responsible as an adult for your premeditated, naked, vicious massacre of this family. It is therefore the conclusion of this court that you should be sentenced on count 1 to life without possibility of parole, count 2 to life without possibility of parole, and on count 3 to life without possibility of parole, those 3 sentences to run consecutively.
Back up. It's taken them a decade, but prosecutors will send the Rafay's only son and his best friend to prison for life.
We've been saying all along, they thought they planned the perfect murder.
Justice has been done for the 3 victims, and our community has held the 2 individuals responsible for this accountable for their conduct. There is a great deal of satisfaction in being part of that, a great deal of satisfaction.
Before we begin, just a trigger warning. The following episode contains references to graphic physical violence. Please listen with care. Welcome to Killer Conversation, a podcast about the criminal mind. My name is Judy Rybak, and I'm a longtime 48 Hours producer. This is part 2 of my conversation with Peter Van Sant about his interviews with 2 convicted killers, Sebastian Burns and Atif Rafay. Burns and Rafay were just teenagers when they murdered Rafay's family, and they might never have been caught were it not for a Canadian sting known as the Mr. Big operation. So, Peter, Mr. Big, what is that?
So this was a unit within the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, an undercover unit that would pose as a organized crime family. And they had the ability, when they had a target, to get that person entwined in their illegal business, what the target thought would be illegal. One of the undercover officers told me, Peter, we have never had a target who we did not successfully pull into our organized crime family. And he said, I'm talking doctors, lawyers, bankers. They were brilliant at this. And so the house was bugged, and an undercover officer hears that Sebastian is going to get his hair cut at a salon in downtown Vancouver. And they decide this is our moment to make an approach to him. They'd also learned that Sebastian and Atif had been working on a screenplay called The Great Despisers. And it's a story about two young men wrongfully accused of murdering a family. Wow, where did they get that idea, Judy? Where do you think they got that? And so when Sebastian came out of the barber shop, there was a member of the Mr. Big undercover team waiting who approaches him and says, hey, how's it going? You know, I left my keys in my car here. You know, can you do me a favor? Drive me down to the local hotel. I got an extra set of keys down there. And so the adventure with the Mr. Big team began.
Right. They went to a bar and they started talking and forming a relationship. And because they knew about the screenplay, they sort of used that to reel him in, right? Like at some point he said, I know somebody who I think can fund your movie, who can give you money to make your film. Let's go meet him. And that very same night, they went to go meet with Mr. Big, who they called Al, right?
Yes. I've met Al. I've interviewed Al in shadow. All the guys on this undercover team were among the most talented I have ever seen. They looked like character actors out of a Hollywood movie. And not long after they meet, this mobster Al, Mr. Big, he asked Sebastian to drive a very expensive stolen car from Whistler Mountain outside of Vancouver back to the city. And Sebastian agreed. And after the delivery, Sebastian was paid $200. That made him angry because he wanted a lot more money than that. But instead of running away from what he thought was a criminal enterprise, Sebastian told them he wanted more money.
Right.
This is what, remember I told you, these guys said we always get somebody. Once they see our world, we're able to hook somebody.
They know their audience, right?
So he and Jimmy Moshi, remember his roommate, they agreed to start laundering money for this Mr. Big enterprise, and they were paid $2,000 for that. Oh, these are guys that can't get jobs. They're suddenly raking in the dough. They're having excitement. They're living on the edge.
Right.
And Sebastian ends up working for this criminal enterprise for nearly 4 months.
I think we should just clarify that Jimmy Moshi was a high school friend who they were living with at the time of the sting operation. So eventually, Sebastian was asked if he was willing to, ready for this, commit murder.
The only reason why I'm talking like that, if you follow the whole conversation, you'll see he's asking me a lot of questions about how does my conscience handle crime. And this is after he's already confessed to me that he's a murderer himself. And after he's also told me that he's worried that I'm a threat to his organization. He's worried that I'm reluctant to work for them. And it was clear that he was worried that I was going to tell them to the police. And the only conceivable purpose, I told him at this point that wouldn't bother my conscience, but I wouldn't want to do it myself. And he continued to ask me questions.
But you're saying I'd do it, but I wouldn't do it. You're saying, yeah, I'd kill somebody, but, I guess I wouldn't kill somebody. Is that what you're saying we should take from that exchange?
Well, what you should take from that exchange is that I was trying to satisfy him that I wasn't going to tell the police what he had just confessed to me. And I also told him, however, that I didn't want to do it. I mean, the sum total...
Are we getting a glimpse here into the real Sebastian Burns, the man who had murdered a family and is now telling one of these undercover guys, you're willing to do it again?
No, that's completely not true. And if you read the rest of that excerpt, Peter, I think that it will be more clear that what I'm telling him there is that I do not want to do that.
So is it true? Did he try to walk away? Did he ever say no to anything?
No, he stays. He says because he was afraid of what they would do to him if he didn't. But we already know that he is delighted, and they've heard on these bugging devices, he's delighted by the money that's coming in.
So they tell the boys that that they've heard that there's evidence against them in the case in Washington, right? They have a memo that they show them that says that police found hairs and DNA and blood evidence that's gonna turn the whole case around. And they tell the boys that that they can help get rid of that evidence.
Yeah, this is really convincing stuff. This is very persuasive to him that, oh my God, they've got this evidence, and Mr. Big, with all his connections, can destroy that evidence. But Sebastian has to agree to do something. What is it, Judy?
He has to confess to the murders.
That's right. And this is very clever. And this is where, in the United States at that time, if there was an undercover operation like this, you tell me, would this be admissible?
No, absolutely not. Yeah.
You're absolutely right. It would not be admissible. And Sebastian is, he's heading down that drain. It's swirling, and he's losing control, because now they're going to have to tell Mr. Big exactly what happened, to Mr. Big's satisfaction, at Atif's family's home. And eventually Sebastian and Atif are sitting in a room with Mr. Big. They're unaware that there's a hidden video camera, and it's recording every second of their conversation, picture and sound.
So this is Atif's first meeting with Mr. Big and his people. What did they say? What did they tell them about the murders?
There's no doubt about it. Sebastian admits to doing the murders, and he details how he did it, beginning with the mother, then the father, then the daughter, all beaten with a bat. Yeah, the way he confesses on that undercover tape is so matter of fact, and at times he even laughs about it. You talk to him about that.
Your behavior on that tape, when there's some laughing, did you think that the murder of the Rafay family was some sort of a comedy?
No, absolutely not. But we were lying, and I was not thinking about the murder of the Rafay family when I was talking. I was trying to pass off a story, and for whatever reason, I guess the way that the whole ordeal affected me was to get nervous and to kind of giggle a bit. And I mean, in one sense, I was trying to act casual, and in another way, I was, I guess, just genuinely giggling nervously.
You laugh when you say Bosma needed a little extra bat work. That's sick, isn't it?
Well, yes. I don't want to split hairs, but the quote is actually a little more effort. I mean, not that it's much better, and I guess that is just splitting hairs, but at the same time, it's a little bit different.
That's not any better. Effort is still outrageous. You laugh when you're talking about killing Bosma.
Yeah, well, we were lying, and at that point, I felt very awkward because I didn't know what to say about it to Al, because we didn't do it, and I was making up a story, and I was chuckling awkwardly because I didn't know what to say. And we had already heard some of the details in the newspaper about what supposedly happened there, and I was just in a really awkward position, and I was just kind of chuckling nervously.
Sebastian, aren't we looking at you on this videotape? The real Sebastian Burns, the person who planned this murder, killed these people, and has no conscience to the point where you can laugh about it.
No, that's completely wrong. No, you are never seeing the real me on any of these tapes, in my opinion.
In my opinion, what an odd thing to say. Sebastian claims he was forced to confess, that he was afraid of what the mob boss might do to him if he didn't. So Atif is there that day, and he also confessed. They needed both boys there, right?
Yeah, but Atif claims that he also felt trapped in that moment and had no choice, that, if they confessed, the mob boss was going to protect him, and destroy that evidence down in Bellevue. And if they didn't, who knows what would have happened to them.
I certainly had no way of dealing with the situation other than the one that was offered by the undercover operatives, whereby somehow they would essentially magically take care of all our problems. And I can say that I almost enjoyed the irony of making a false confession in order to obtain a true exoneration. I thought that was kind of neat.
Neat? It was neat making up a story about his murdered family?
What can I say? And like Sebastian, he laughed when he talked about the murder of his sister Basma.
You have declined to discuss the details of these murders during the course of this interview, what you saw inside your own house.
Right.
And yet, in front of two mobsters, you laugh about it and you give complete detail about what happened inside that house. I don't get it.
It's easier to talk about a fiction than it is about the truth, I think, in that way. I didn't have any emotional feelings about a fake story that I was telling.
He doesn't ever have any emotional feelings, or it doesn't appear that he's emotional. Anyway, to a lot of people, what the Canadian officers did feels like entrapment and coerced confessions. In fact, Sebastian's sister made a documentary about the Mr. Big operation that got Innocence International to take on Atif and Sebastian's case. But all of the appeals were denied.
At the time when I was covering this, and the way it was explained in court, is that this was an undercover operation that was completely legal in Canada at that time. Eventually, it became illegal, but at that time it was legal. And here in the U.S., there was an exception called the Silver Platter Doctrine, which said that if an operation was legal in the country where it was conducted, it was then admissible here in the United States. And defense attorneys tried to get the video thrown out, but the judge in Sebastian and Atif's trial allowed jurors to watch it. And on it, the boys confess.
Do you think they would have been convicted without those tapes?
I am not sure that they would have been convicted with what the neighbors had heard of these killings going on at a time when the boys were seen in a movie theater. I think there is hung jury was a real possibility, or an acquittal was a real possibility. This was the moment.
Right. Or there may never have been a trial, right?
Those of you who've been listening to all this, what do you think?
Right.
If that tape had not been played, would these boys have been convicted?
Right.
I think there's an excellent chance that they would not have been.
So a little over a year after the murders, they tell these Canadian officers that they committed the murders, but it took nearly 6 years to extradite them. Why?
Well, at the heart of this was the death penalty. There is no death penalty for murder in Canada, and the Canadian government said they're not going to extradite the boys until the judge in this case agreed to take, and prosecutors agreed to take the death penalty off the table, which eventually happened.
Right. Both boys were represented by public defenders, and there's kind of a crazy story about how they were pulled off the case.
Yeah.
Is it true that Sebastian had sex with one of his attorneys?
Yeah. So I'll leave her name out of it. She's been through so much. But he had this dynamic woman attorney that was considered one of the best in the public defender's office. She had gone to Japan to see Jimmy Moshi. Remember, he was Sebastian and Atif's roommate in Vancouver, British Columbia. And Jimmy had been accused of conspiring in the murders, and he made a deal with the state to testify against his friends, and then he moved to Japan. Well, Sebastian's lawyer flew to Japan to meet with him, and she came back. She was incredibly excited because she claimed that Jimmy told her that he felt leaned on to make the deal, and she was excited that if she could present this in court, it would completely undermine him as a witness. And I was told by the prosecutor in the case, who talked to the guards who watched some of this unfold, she ran into his into the meeting room. She gives him this big hug. She tells him the news. They hug again, and then the hug immediately progressed into removal of clothing. A guard who was watching all of this called two other guards over, and because they were on a slightly second floor that they could look down and see this window on the door, this small window, could see inside. And they said, "Do you see what I see? Okay. Do you see what I see? Yeah, we all know what that is. Okay. Well, then let's go break this up." And it's a felony to have sex with an inmate in jail like that. And she had her law license suspended. She was taken off the case. And she had a partner who was incredibly bright and talented. And the two of them were taken off because they were a team. So when these two defense attorneys come in, instead of having years of research behind them, they had a few months to get prepared for this. And that was devastating to Sebastian and Atif's case.
So speaking of Jimmy Moshi, he had a lot to say in his deposition. He said that Atif told him that he had wanted to kill his family and that he was present when Sebastian killed his mother.
Yeah, he said he'd been present when Sebastian and Atif had discussed their plans to murder the family. And he specifically said he recalled them saying that they planned to stay at the Rafay home for a few days before the murder so their DNA and hair would be explainable when it was discovered during forensic examination.
Part of the plan, part of the master plan. So there was a bit of physical evidence that showed that there might have been someone else involved in the murder, at least of Tariq. What was that?
Well, there was a hair, just a single hair found on the body of Tariq Rafay that didn't belong to anyone in the family or Sebastian. Now, of course, Tariq worked in the outside world, and being at work, if somebody had given him a hug or anything else, you could see transference there. But there was also, and this was really strange, there was blood in the garage that was discovered that didn't belong to anyone in the family or to Sebastian. And also then, don't forget, the two neighbors who testified that they heard a commotion at the house at a time when the boys were in that movie theater.
Right. So Sebastian took the witness stand, which doesn't surprise me at all. What about you?
It doesn't surprise me. I'll use that phrase, brilliantly stupid.
Right.
His attorneys said, "Don't do this. We have a chance. There's some reasonable doubt in here. And do not do this." And Sebastian insisted.
If he was anything like he was in your interview, I can only imagine that the jury just hated him.
Yeah, he had that same attitude.
Right.
He was very put out while answering questions. And that attitude is of, "I'm smarter than you, and I'm the one you should believe."
So at his sentencing, Sebastian never showed any remorse, told the jurors they were wrong, and went on for nearly 2 hours. What did he say?
Yeah, I was there. This was theater in the round, one-man performance. He talked to the judge directly, but also then turned back to talk to the people in the room, all of us that were there. He insisted he was innocent, repeated himself over and over about why the jury was wrong. He threw his defense team under the bus, called them ineffective. He claimed he didn't know he would testify until the morning of and was unprepared. That's not true. Defense attorney had told me that they had urged him not to do this. He forced them to put him on the stand. He insisted that he had not had his day in court and asked that if he could have a new trial and represent himself. The judge told him to wrap it up many times.
This is what the judge said when he sentenced Sebastian to 3 consecutive life sentences. "Mr. Burns, you are not immoral, you are amoral. You are an arrogant, convicted killer. You are not a kid, as you so often refer to yourself. You're an adult, and you will be held responsible as an adult for your premeditated, naked, vicious massacre of this family. Of all the mic drops I've ever heard delivered from the bench, that was epic."
If I may say, a touch of genius from the judge. Such, as Atif might say, such irony for the two geniuses whose brilliance and arrogance had turned on them and led to their demise.
Yes. On the other hand, Atif seemed to get choked up at his sentencing. He didn't admit to his crime, but he showed remorse for his behavior.
For the first time, and I had interviewed him and things, I saw some humanity there. The big question always in a situation like that is he sad for what he did, or is he sad that he got caught?
Right, exactly. And was it genuine, or was he just terrified? So they both got 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. And of course, they vowed to fight their wrongful conviction, but they're never getting out, right?
Well, it's doubtful now. Sebastian has exhausted all of his appeals. Atif has 1 more to go. But I think it is very doubtful that that they will ever see life outside of a prison cell. Here's an exchange I had with Atif.
How would you describe what has happened to you?
I don't know. I guess we'd have to use words like disaster and calamity and other things. It's very easy to fall into the rut of self-pity, and so I try not to think on it too much. Luckily, it's very easy to, I guess, think of other things and fall into a sort of unmindfulness of your present situation.
And here's Sebastian.
Do you still see the images of their bodies when you think about the Rafay house, when you think about that night? Can you still see it in your mind's eye? Is it something you live with, that memory?
Truly, I don't know. It was something that was very much with me for, I know, the first year after it happened, especially with the first few weeks. It's been 10 years now. And so, in a lot of ways, I'm over it.
Why do you think they never turned on each other?
I still believe that they believe, and this is what has sustained them all these years, is that one day they will outsmart the system on appeal. They're down to their last one for Atif. And I don't think Atif could ever have turned on Sebastian, his idol and his mentor.
Right. So today they're both 49 years old. They're still in custody in the Monroe Correctional Complex. Atif was married in 2017, but is now divorced. Not surprisingly, he seems to have been, or is, a model prisoner, studying and teaching and writing papers and articles. All we know about Sebastian is that his parents visit him once a month, and according to them, he spent 10 years in solitary confinement. Well, Peter, we could go on forever, but we won't.
Yeah, somebody wrote a book about it.
Yes, you did.
That my relatives bought. Perfectly Executed is the book. I wrote it with Janet Jackson, one of the producers.
All right. Thank you again.
Yeah, and thanks for reliving this with me. It is one of the most extraordinary cases of my career, and one I'll carry with me forever.
I can see why. 48 Hours Killer Conversation is hosted and produced by me, Judy Rybak. Our story editor is Maura Walls. Alan Pang oversees recording, mixing, and sound design, fact-checking, and additional production support from Rebecca LaFlamme. And special thanks to 48 Hours executive producer Judy Tygard and Paramount Podcast Vice President Megan Marcus.